All right. Thank you for joining us today. Today we have the Green Party candidate for Glasgow Kelvin. He is also the co-leader of the Green Party, Patrick Harvie. Thank you for joining
Hi,
us.
how are you?
All right. So the first question is, why should Glasgow students vote for you?
Well, I think the overwhelming reason why we're asking people to vote Green in this election is because our future depends on it. I'll talk a little bit in a moment about student issues specifically, but the critical moment of opportunity that this election represents can't be overstated. I think the task of recovering from a crisis like the COVID pandemic is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity to reshape our society. A little bit in the same way that the generation after the Second World War did. They fought together, they survived together, and they decided to rebuild together. And they laid the foundations of a welfare state and a national health service. And for decades after that, this country's society became steadily more equal. I think we have a moment of just the same magnitude of opportunity. Even tepid centrist politicians around the world, like Joe Biden and some of the politicians in the European Commission, are setting out plans for an investment-led recovery. This country can't afford to be left behind in that. And if we're going to have that investment-led recovery, it means warm homes, it means public transport, it means green jobs for the future in renewables, and it means restoring nature. Making sure that Scotland's land actually serves the natural environment as well as good quality rural jobs. So there's an incredible opportunity to shape Scotland's future for the better. I think during the pandemic as well, Greens have shown that we have been on the side of students who've been, often forced back onto campus at the wrong time, exploited by accommodation providers. We've tried to make sure that students in the private sector, whether it's individual private landlords or purpose-built student accommodation, have got a fair deal instead of being left at the mercy of powerful landlord interests. I think obviously the future of the world is going to be debated as well here in Glasgow Kelvin, with the COP conference coming to Glasgow. It's going to be within this constituency. So I think this is a real moment of opportunity to show that we're up for building that better future that we know is possible.
How would you prevent capital flight in order to achieve this manifesto aim and then other manifesto aims relating to green policies?
Sure, and if this was a challenge that only Scotland was facing on its own, that might be a serious concern. But the reality is this is an agenda that all governments are beginning finally to face up to. We've got extraordinary wealth inequality in our society, but that also means that's resource that's locked up either in asset wealth or stashed away in tax havens. And that resource needs to be turned to the task of COVID recovery. So even the IMF, hardly the loony left of global economic thought, are saying wealth taxes need to form the basis of the investment-led recovery for governments right around the world. So this is an agenda that the whole world is finally going to have to grapple with. We've set out proposals for how we can insist on the powers to do that from the UK government. And if they don't do it, if the UK government digs its heels in and tries the same kind of austerity measures that they imposed after the 2008 financial crash, forcing the burden onto those with the least broad shoulders in society, then we're going to have to use the existing devolved powers that we have. And local taxation has been devolved all the way back since 1999. There hasn't been the political will to use it, but we can use that local taxation power to look at asset wealth, things like land and property, which are immobile, but which have been undertaxed by a fundamentally broken and unfair system of local taxation that we have in this country. So that wouldn't be perfect. It would be much better to do it UK-wide or Scotland-wide at least. But if it has to be done at local level, it can be.
All right. So you kind of talk about like funding different services in the welfare state. Mental health services have been drastically underfunded, especially at universities across Scotland. how would you plan on addressing Scotland's mental health crisis?
Yeah, I mean, we've already set out a programme of investment of 360 odd million increase on mental health services, with a heavy emphasis on young people, not just universities, but schools as well. We need mental health services to be accessible in communities through people's GP practices and other community services. The mental health professionals, they're also working incredibly hard. Their mental health and well-being is itself an issue, as it is right throughout the NHS and social care. So we need to be investing in the people who deliver those services rather than just asking the impossible of them. But the other really big issue in this mental health crisis that we're facing is causation. What are the driving factors that lead people into mental health crisis or that exacerbate existing mental health problems? And it's the metaphor we use is it's a little bit like we're fishing people out of the river, while further upstream people are still being pushed into the river. And that's the problem we have if we focus only on those services. The services are needed, but we need to be looking at secure housing, secure incomes. We need to be looking at people's working and living conditions. We need to be looking at all aspects of our health. Physical health impacts on mental health as well. So we need to be looking at the causation of the problems and trying to make sure that we're addressing that. And bizarrely, one factor in the education system is the high stress, high stakes exams model. We've seen the last 2 years a fundamental change to that exams model, first with an algorithm and now with what look like kind of fake, phony, are they exams, are they not? No one's quite sure. I think if we take away that stress and pressure from young people who are being tested on their ability to do exams rather than tested actually on or assessed on what they've actually learned and what their capabilities are. If we shifted that to year-round assessment rather than the high stakes exams at the end of the school year, I think people would be coming through their school years and into whether it's college, university or the workplace without that expectation that life is all about stress.
So you kind of started talking about this issue, but what role do you believe that the Scottish government should play as far as universities?
Well, I mean, fundamentally, universities are an extension of a public service, education. And they're not provided directly by the state. Universities themselves are independent bodies. But I think the context needs to be set by the Scottish government that education is a public service. Now, this has been done in part by ensuring that we resist the pressure for fees. Education should be free at the point of access, and either upfront fees or a graduate tax would be unacceptable to us. Education should be provided through the taxpayer, through the public purse, because actually everybody benefits. It's not just the person who gets the education that benefits. We all rely on having an educated population so that we have the ability to run public services, to run our economy. So providing it through the taxpayer, through the state, is the most important principle. But I think that needs to go further. And I think a lot of universities have moved away from the sense of being a democratic learning community and turning into businesses that sell education as an export commodity. And that I think distorts the purpose of education. I think there's other aspects like the framework that determines how research gets funded, for example, seems to be all about how many citations do you get? What's the commercial immediate commercial payoff of a particular strand of research? And actually, this diminishes our ability to be broad-minded in our educational and our research focus. Education is about our holistic experience of life. It's not just about what's going to pay off in the next quarter's GDP figures.
All right. So you kind of talked about how universities, in your opinion, don't always aren't supposed to be centrally focused on jobs, but a lot of young people who are coming off their university are worried about their job prospects post-COVID. How do you believe that your party will help with this?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, I believe that the Greens are the only party that is willing to face up to the reality of the economic change that is coming. The age of oil is coming to an end. The fossil fuel era is coming to an end. And if we don't end it, it will end us. So, we need to be recognizing that profound economic change is coming and investing for the future, investing in the sustainable industries of the future. Now, the green investment plan that we're putting forward in this election, we believe it can generate over 100,000 new high quality jobs in Scotland. It focuses on areas like renewable energy, warm homes. Scotland has a housing crisis and we need to be investing like mad to achieve that high quality, secure housing that people need. Public transport, and also restoring nature. As well as the climate emergency, we have a nature emergency, the collapse of the living world around us. And actually, if we restore nature, if land in Scotland is used to restore rich, biologically diverse and ecologically productive landscapes, it can also support really good quality rural jobs as well. So right throughout Scotland, these four strands of investment, we believe, have the potential to replace and more the jobs that will be lost in oil and gas. But the role of the state is critical in this. It is not going to be left to the market. The market will not deliver. And if the role of the state is going to be important, as it has been in the last year, with the private sector effectively relying on the state's borrowing power and the state's staying power to keep things going, then collectively, the public has the right to set the terms and conditions and ensure that the economy that we build through that public investment is one that serves all of our interests instead of serving only the wealthiest, who then stash the wealth that the rest of us have created away in tax havens. That kind of broken economy was already failing us before COVID. That's not what we have to rebuild.
So you kind of talked about the climate crisis in that. And it's obviously a pressing issue, an issue that a lot of students and generally Scotland tends to value. So what actions do you plan on implementing, or what would be your number one policy initiative beyond the green jobs?
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously for a Green politician, it's very close to my heart. And in many ways, I feel really reassured that the level of awareness, the level of engagement in this issue is higher than it's ever been. The climate strike movement, the school strikers, Fridays for Future, and all of this kind of incredible, strong, creative, angry, and impatient movement is really one of the most encouraging developments politically that I've seen in many years. And I had the privilege last year, I think it might have been a few weeks before lockdown, maybe a month before lockdown, I was speaking at one of these rallies in George Square, and I had the privilege of introducing my mum as another speaker, because she was a green activist decades ago when I was younger than the audience were there. When I was a wee kid, my mum was a green activist. And if the world had listened to the green movement in her day, back in the late 70s, early 80s, mid 80s, then the job would be so much easier. We could have made these changes slowly and gradually and effectively. The only reason we now have to use phrases like climate emergency is that the world didn't act when there was still lots of time. So we now have to make radical, rapid changes. One of the biggest areas of failure in Scotland is transport policy, where politicians, for the most part, are still trying to offer people more of the same. Let's make it easier for you to drive. Let's make it easier and cheaper for you to get a car. That's not what we need. We need investment in active travel. We need our towns and our cities to be safe, pleasant places to walk, cycle, and wheel. And we need public transport that really meets people's needs. That's why one of the most important budget concessions that we've got out of the SNP recently is free bus travel for all Scotland's young people. Everybody under the age of 22 will get access to free bus travel when that comes in later this year. The kind of thing that will normalise public transport use and actually save young people money. I mean, I've spoken to folk in, maybe not quite in Glasgow, where they don't have to travel quite so far, but folk in other areas like west of Scotland and south of Scotland, where that free bus travel policy is going to be the difference between being stuck in a dead-end minimum wage job and being able to take a college course. Because the college course might be free, but if you're having to pay 30, 40, 50 pounds a week for your bus travel, there's no way that you can afford to do that. So this kind of position can be good for our environment, driving down transport emissions, which have been going up in recent years before the pandemic. It's not just that they've been reducing too slowly, they've been going up. So we can drive down those emissions, but do it in a way that actually is economically liberating and empowering for people as well.
So you kind of mentioned the SNP there, and one of the things that you guys share is your support for Scottish independence, just becoming more favored by young people. Would you support another referendum? And then why do you think that Scottish students should back independence?
Yeah, the Greens are very clearly saying there should be another independence referendum within the next Parliament. I think it's too soon to put a date on that because we are still, struggling our way out of COVID. We're still not out of lockdown yet, and there are really, really immediate challenges in the months ahead. So I think it's probably too soon to fix a date on that. But certainly within the new Parliament, then within the new 5-year term, I think it's necessary. And fundamentally, the promises that were made in 2014 have been broken. I was born in 1973, a couple of months after the UK had entered what is now the European Union. And I was part of that first generation for whom it was normal, unquestioned, that we would have the right to live, work, study, make a life throughout the EU, throughout the European community of countries. And I find it really dismal and heartbreaking to see that opportunity taken away from today's generation of young people. For generation after generation, century after century, the story of Europe was about sending young people into fields and ditches to slaughter one another to serve the interests of government. And after the Second World War, it's an incredible change that was brought about. I think it's one of the most extraordinary political achievements in modern history is the development of freedom of movement across Europe. It's liberating, it's empowering for people. It says to young people, you get to choose whether you want to travel across Europe for whatever purpose, to make a life. And yeah, our only route back now into Europe is through independence. We were told in 2014, the way to protect Scotland's place in Europe is to vote no. Well, that promise, has been blown out of the water, and Scotland voted to remain. And any proposal to soften Brexit, even to accept the principle, but to say, can we do this in a softer way? Can we stay inside the single market, say, as Boris Johnson previously said should be done if the UK voted for Brexit? No. What we got was the hardest of hard Brexits. It broke promises to people in Scotland. It's clearly broken promises to people on the island of Ireland, where in the north, they're thrown back into this deeply, deeply scary place in their history. So yeah, if we want to honour the wishes of the people of Scotland who voted for both unions, I don't think there's a way to do that. So ultimately, if the polls are right, opinion is shifting in the direction of Scotland's place as an independent country within Europe, and I think the attitudes and values of Scotland's young people are much more in tune with that aspiration than they are with the values of Brexit Britain.
All right, kind of cycling back a bit. So we talked about the NHS before, and it's been a huge focus this year. What specifically do you think a Green government would do differently with the NHS?
Well, there clearly does need to be a scale of investment, unlike anything that we've seen in recent years. And that's going to be the case throughout the UK. And I think all of the nations of the UK are going to be following a relatively similar path in terms of scale of investment. We clearly need to be looking at the well-being of the workforce, though. As I said earlier, this incredibly difficult, grim year, it's been tough for everybody, but people on the front line, people delivering those health services, have had the most extraordinary time, and COVID being over, if we get to that point of getting COVID back under control, the whole population vaccinated, really low case levels, we can all hope for that. But that doesn't mean the challenge is over for the NHS. They still have a massive backlog. They don't get a rest after that. So we clearly have a huge recruitment agenda that needs to be undertaken. And there also needs to be much more investment in the community services, like GP surgeries, that primary care element, which very often is closest to the solutions that keep people healthy rather than just treating illness. So we'd like to see much more of the investment that's coming into the NHS driven into that primary care and public health focus at a community level, so that we can really improve the aspects of the way that we live that improve and nurture good health rather than just treating ill health. Because if that's all we're focused on, treating ill health, you're never going to get to the end of that. You're never going to have enough of that. There's always going to be another crisis around the corner.
That kind of reminds me of when I was talking to another Green candidate. They kind of talked about this localization of care. Is that something that you would support? And then what kind of elements would you believe that would be seen as?
I mean, localization's always been a big element of Green philosophy generally, and that applies to public services. It applies to the way that we travel. It applies to our food system. And actually, a lot of these things join up. If you have a healthy food system that's not dominated by a handful of multinationals whose priority is always profit rather than public health, if you have an active travel infrastructure in your towns and your cities, and people can get a reasonable amount of physical exercise barely without even noticing, just by moving about, without relying on motor cars all the time. If you have these aspects of a health giving society, if we design our towns, our cities, and our urban environment in a way that promotes good health, then it empowers people to take a bit of control of their own health, and it also relieves pressure on those services. So yes, it's about decentralization of services, but it's also about rethinking how we live, how we construct our towns, our cities, and the homes that we live in.
Got two more questions for you. A recent internal report revealed that there were huge racial problems within the University of Glasgow, and last year an internal review of Police Scotland found huge racial biases. How do you plan on helping Scotland become a safer place for people of colour?
Yeah, this is hugely important, and especially in the wake of the UK government's attempt to propagandize its way out of the concept of institutional racism. They handpicked some academics who've always opposed the whole concept of institutional racism and said, well, you write a report about this, and surprise, surprise, they wrote a report saying it's not a problem, move along here, nothing to see. Well, I think in Scotland we have hopefully a consensus that agenda is not where we want to go. I think there's a reasonable degree of willingness to take this issue on. Institutions can be very slow to change, and Police Scotland is one. The values of folk who were trained up decades ago in some cases and are still in post, they can be very, very slow to change. There are aspects of this which are about training, are about education, but there's also aspects of this which are about trying to understand the problem better, trying to measure the problem better. And I think a lot of people would acknowledge we do have data on different outcomes for people of colour, for people from different ethnic minority backgrounds, but we don't have very much data, certainly not enough, on what is the connection to their access to services. What are the barriers to public services and to economic participation, and how do those feed through to things like unequal outcomes in health, in criminal justice, in their socioeconomic situation. So we need to understand the problems better, and I think we fundamentally need to involve the people who are affected by these issues in the design of the solution. So it shouldn't be for somebody like me to say, here's what's going to fix racism in our society. We need to be empowering and giving voice to the communities who are marginalized. And I would maybe a little bit compare it to other issues. When I first got involved in politics in Glasgow, I come from an LGBT background, and it was only just in 1981 that male homosexuality was decriminalized. So you had a police force that was still institutionally geared toward thinking, this is a community that our job is to arrest, rather than this is a community that our job is to protect. And it's still the case that it takes years, decades in fact, for that culture to change. I think we can achieve the same kind of culture change in relation to minority ethnic communities. And I know that the term Black and minority ethnic communities is I think falling out of favour, understandably, because it kind of glosses over the rich diversity within the groups that we're trying to describe here. But I've gone on quite a long time about this, but the last thing I'll say on this is that there are aspects of the UK government's agenda which are still deeply hostile and racist in terms of the immigration system, the asylum system. Asylum seekers in Glasgow are still being treated as though they are just part of a human warehouse. The dignity that they deserve is just not being delivered. And allied to that, you have a long-standing, decades, centuries-old, racism around communities like Gypsy traveller communities that have been part of Scottish society and a marginalised part of Scottish society for a very, very long time. It's within living memory that racially segregated schooling was attempted in Scotland in relation to the Gypsy traveller community. And there are right-wing governments in Europe that are going back to that agenda right now in a very, very brutal way. So we need to recognise, the threat that is posed by the kind of agenda that we see in the UK, not absolve ourselves of blame for it, but take on the challenges of trying to overcome it.
All right. My final question for you is, obviously you're the co-convener or leader of the Green Party. Do you believe that you can balance handling constituency issues and constituent concerns on top of your duties as a party leader?
Yes, plenty of other people have managed it before. I don't see why I couldn't. I think one of the advantages actually of having a co-leadership arrangement in the Greens is that it is more of a kind of collegiate atmosphere. We've never been the kind of party where one person is sitting at the top of a hierarchy making all the decisions and everybody else just has to do what they're told. And so the co-leaders are much more like the kind of public face of a kind of collegiate team within the Greens. That's the way that we like it. I've worked really hard as a regional MSP for Glasgow for a number of years now, and I know that the challenges of being a constituency MSP would be different. You'd have a much more local focus. I actually think it's a real benefit of the Scottish Parliament electoral system that you have people with that local focus and people with a more regional focus. But I think it's pretty clear that people from a number of different parties have taken on both of those jobs, as well as being their party leaders or co-leaders, as well as being in government. If Nicola Sturgeon can be a constituency MSP and First Minister, I'm quite sure I can be a constituency MSP for Kelvin, and a good one, as well as being Scottish Green Party co-leader.
Well, that's all the time we have questions for today. Thank you so much again for joining us. Don't forget to go out and vote.
Well, thank you very much for having me.